All right, now let's take a look at a revolutionary new way of taking a look at how to understand the fundamental structures of an economy, and then building on that and building and using the 9 concepts that are the core concepts of our whole course of study through economics, is like maybe there's an economic model that's better than what has existed before. So this video is going to take a look at the linear economic model that has existed before, then going to adapt that to take a look at the circular model, which is something that's come about only recently, only in the last like 10 years, if economists started thinking about maybe the model shouldn't just be a line, but actually, a circle or circular economy where we use things and then reuse things. And then we'll take a look at some revolutionary work done by a woman named Kate Raworth, who has come up with this new way of thinking about maybe the best example of how to move forward when we think about economic behavior of human beings. Okay? All right, so first of all, let's just get our brains straight on what it is that was in the past, okay? So take a look at the linear economy. This is what we've been talking about all throughout this chapter. We've been talking about the take, make, waste approach, which is a line I stole from Jocelyn Blank and Ian Dorton. But basically, like, here's the earth, right? We take things from the earth, natural resources, we make stuff, and then we throw it in the landfill, right? It's very, very linear. This is the world of the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and recycling really didn't come around until like the 1980s, where it's like, man, we have all this plastic floating in the ocean, and where is it going to go? Or we have just piles and piles and piles of things that are piling and piling and piling up in landfills. And the reason was that the basic idea is that you take from the earth, you make something, and then you put it away, and you throw it away. And I have to say, like, I had an experience in the Dominican Republic as a Peace Corps volunteer where I was living in an environment where people had very little access to education. Most of the adults in the community of 130 people where I lived didn't have an education. They didn't recognize their names written on a piece of paper. And I remember this moment where I was watching this young girl. She was maybe like 6, and she had a little sucker, like a little lollipop, and she took the wrapper off and she chucked it on the ground. And I was like, what are you doing? Waste, right? And then there was a girl next to her who was eating a banana. And she peeled the banana and ate the banana, and what did she do with the peel of her banana? Well, she threw that on the ground. And like somewhere in there, I was like, wow, like it's okay to waste the peel of a banana, but obviously not the wrapper that goes to a lollipop. But if you really think about it, it's kind of the same thing. And so you kind of have to start realizing and thinking about ways in which the evolution of economic thinking has adapted along those same lines. Like you can't just throw a piece of plastic on the earth and have it go away, right? So maybe that plastic could be recycled in a circular fashion and become something else. And that's where the circular model comes from, okay? So we understand the linear economy, okay? So what would this sort of new circular economy look like? Well, it starts right here where we would take something, right? And then in this case, it's looking like an iPhone or maybe some sort of tablet or something, right? We take something, we make something out of it, we use it, right? Then what do? We reuse it, right? And then it becomes something that we refurbish, reuse, recycle, and then we take that thing, right, and reuse it again. And so the idea of a circular economy is we're living in a world that is taking into account the fact that there are just too many people on this planet. That's the fundamental problem. There are too many of us. And the reason there are too many of us is in the last 150 years, like the scientific and medical research has saved millions, billions of lives, and now we live long. There's a whole bunch of people that if they were born 250 years ago would have been dead by pneumonia or by a simple, cut on the arm and some bacteria gets in there. And before we had antibiotics, it would have killed us, right? But there are just so many people on this planet. And as a result, I like to think about the world just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, you just start using things up, okay? So the circular economy this model emerges in that when you go into production, so what's the application of this? When we go into production, we should use things, first of all, that come from something else that already exists. So reuse, remanufacture, recycle, refurbish. Then we end up with a new product, that gets consumed, purchased, bought, goes through the economy, people get rich, people make the thing, and then that thing gets put back in the circle so that when somebody wants to make something new, they take that information or they take that good and redo it. A good example of this, because that's kind of abstract, is Patagonia. Patagonia, the company that makes all sorts of outdoor gear. One of the things that they do exceptionally well is they reuse the products that they had previously created. So when you buy a new coat from Patagonia, you can actually turn your old coat in, they'll give you a discount on the new coat, and then they'll reuse those resources, the zipper or whatever it is, in the manufacture of new products. Okay, so that's a good example of the circular economy. Now, we're talking about when we talk about this, we're talking about the linear economy or the circular economy. We're talking about macroeconomics, which macroeconomics is like the economy of a country, okay? And so it's all good and fine if like Patagonia's doing that, or you or I do that, but we're talking about a complete structural change of the ways in which we use things. And I think the best way to think about the circular economy is like, if you're going to make something, where do you start? Do you start in the earth and extract new stuff, or do you start with what the available resources are that might be man-made, right, human-made, and as a result you create something there? So Patagonia's looking at their old coat saying, hey, we already manufactured this, maybe we can reuse some of this nylon, some of the padding, some of the zippers, whatever, and as opposed to creating new ones. Okay, so that's the circular economy. Cool. Now, I want to take a look at something called the donut economy, which came from this revolutionary work done by Kate Raworth. And her whole idea is like this combination of economics, and which, by the way, and I love teaching economics because economics is the combination of two parts of our bodies. This is the way I think about it: our brains and our hearts. Our brains might know that certain economic theories are, quote, better, meaning that they will produce more things for a lower price. But our hearts might know that by doing that, we're going to exploit certain workers, right? So the challenges of governments is like cold-hearted, and this is why I say that, or like completely cognitive, make it positive, completely cognitive economic theory is like the classical theory, the neoclassical theory of economics, where it's just like, lower costs for producers, they'll produce more for less, and that will benefit everybody. Which, by the way, is true. Like, that is true. If you look at the wealthiest nations on this planet, they have two common characteristics. One, democracy. Two, free markets. That will create wealth, undoubtedly, okay? However, capitalism also has produced real human misery, which is where this evolution of socialist measures, which is what the government does, comes from. Capitalism is first, socialism is second. Adam Smith is first, Karl Marx is second. Cold-hearted capitalism of free markets is first. Government intervention to protect certain segments of society is second. Okay, a good example of that is like businesses would prefer to pay people their labor as little as possible. But if that labor is little as possible, that payment can't even sustain life, then the government comes in and creates something called the minimum wage, which is them taking care of the workers. Okay, cool. What Kate Raworth did is say, listen, we got to rethink all of this, right? Because we live on a planet that we are consuming. And we have reached a time in our history where we have established that human beings have certain rights to maintain themselves. There's certain dignity that every human being should have. There are certain things that they should have access to. We have created so much wealth. Capitalism has created so much wealth that we've reached a moment in our history where we need to think about the whole global community as one, as opposed to like 200 smaller, macro or domestic economies. What if we thought of the whole world as one economy? How about that? What if we took the model, and if you think about the United States economy, they're taking in all 50 states into account when they think about the economy, right? Yeah. So what if, and now U.S. government's doing that, but what if we thought of the whole planet as one economic entity? What would it look like? What kinds of things would we want our citizens to have? Okay, so this donut economy idea is really, really quite cool, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here so that you can take a look at it. Okay, immediately you will see that it is circular in nature, which is what a donut is, right? Okay, so what is this? Well, I want you to take I want to place your attention on the center part of the donut. So the donut would be the green, okay? Just to give you an idea of like where the donut comes from, right? The donut's the green. The center is a place where there's no nourishment, no food. Outside of the green, there's no nourishment or no food. So you are going to, where you want to be is right here. You want the donut, okay? So what does this look like? Okay, well, there are two like rings of the donut. The inner ring, which is the social foundation, and the second one is the ecological ceiling. What Kate Raworth said is that what we want to do is build a world where everybody has some basic needs met, okay? And those sorts of basic needs would be the kinds of things that all of us would prefer that our world would create. Like, for example, food. Like, for example, health, education, right? Income and work, peace and justice, a political voice, social equity, gender equity, housing, a standard of living of housing, access to social networks, access to energy or power or lights, and access to water. So if you think about the social foundation, what she's saying, and I like to think of things on a really small and make them simple, like if you're going to set up, a world, if you're going to set up a place, a world around us, what are the basic things that you think most people should have? They should have energy, they should have water, they should have food, they should have equality, social justice, gender equity, all of the things that our heart knows is better. We know those things are better, okay? And so we would take care of all of our beings on this planet and creating an economy where the basic necessities of all human beings were met, both physically and in a human way, okay? And we would operate in there, and that means that we would not operate at a point that goes beyond the second ring, which is this second green ring, which is the ecological ceiling. And if we produce beyond that, right? Beyond that boundary, what will we do? We will create climate change. We will lead to the increased levels of acid in the ocean, right? We would have chemical pollution. We would have a situation where nitrogen and phosphorus there's too much of it, loading, the fresh water withdrawals. We would have land conversion. We would have less biodiversity. We would have air pollution. We would have the ozone layer being depleted. We would have all of the things that none of us actually, if we thought about it personally, would ever desire for our economy or for our world, okay? So this donut theory, Kate Raworth's theory, has revolutionized economic thought at the macro level. And usually the macro level is talking about countries. But what she's saying, because if you look at all of these things, the ozone layer and all of the environmental degradation that we do to our planet is way beyond country. That's the problem. That's why it's so hard to solve. It's very hard to solve climate change because if one country's polluting, it's going into the next country. And if one country has an enormous amount of carbon emissions and then the winds blow it to the next country, they suffer from it. And so who's at fault? Well, the country that's producing it, but who's going to be the one that's going to enforce new environmental regulations down on the one country, and that's polluting. That's what's so hard. And Kate Raworth is saying enough is enough. We got to get to a point where we think of ourselves as one planet, one people, all working towards basically the preservation of things that we have, which is to make things sustainable, right? To worry about the economic well-being of people, to think about inequality and equity. And if you think about the 9 pillars of the IB the IB economic curriculum, you see that this donut theory of economics put forth by Kate Raworth hits on so many of those things: interdependence, government intervention, change, scarcity, choice. It's all right there. Okay? And that's your challenge as you go through your studies of economics here. Your challenge is to remember that you're not just studying theory. It doesn't just live in books. The theories that we study are alive through the politics of governments in this world, and as a result, they create these real-life situations. And the beauty of IB Economics, the beauty of the IB Diploma Program, is that it invites you, the student, to come into that conversation, to look through those 9 lenses at what exactly these real life situations mean in terms of this economic theory. All right, my friends, the donut theory of economics is super cool and revolutionary, and it's building towards the future. And it's really exciting to think about as we go forward. All right, we'll see you in the next video. We're rolling on.